Hi, I'm Zariah, 32, born and raised in Ohio. Last week, I sat in a lawyer's office expecting to hear my parents will divide things fairly. Instead, I heard my name followed by nothing. Everything went to my brother. Every single thing. It felt like the floor vanished beneath me. Have you ever been blindsided by family like that? Tell me where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories about family, betrayal, and finding strength again. I never thought I'd be sitting in a lawyer's office, staring at a folder that carried the final words of my parents' lives. The air in that room felt too clean, too quiet, like grief had been scrubbed out and replaced with paperwork. The blinds were half open, and the light came in through thin stripes across the table, cutting through the dust in the air. I could hear the clock ticking behind me, loud and slow, each tick pushing me closer to something I wasn't ready for. My brother, Aaron, sat across from me. He wore that same smug smile he'd had since we were kids. He always looked too calm, too sure of himself. I kept twisting the edge of my sleeve, trying to look composed, but my palms were sweating. I hadn't slept all night, and my stomach felt like a knot of nerves. The lawyer, Mr. Dalton, cleared his throat and began. This is the last will and testament of Mr. and Mrs. Hayes. My parents' names. Hearing them out loud made my chest tighten. I tried to breathe, but the room seemed to shrink with every word he read. Aaron leaned back in his chair, arms crossed like he already knew what was coming. And maybe he did. All property, assets, and financial holdings will be passed on to our son, Aaron Hayes. My ears rang. That was it. No mention of my name. No mention of to our daughter, Zariah. Just silence. I blinked, waiting for the lawyer to continue, to say something else, anything that would make sense. But he didn't. He just kept reading through the rest, the tone of his voice flat and professional, as if he wasn't rewriting my life in front of me. When it was over, Aaron gave a polite little nod, like he'd just sat through a business meeting. Then he turned toward me. "You okay, Z? I know this must be surprising." Surprising. That word hit harder than I expected. I wanted to shout at him, to demand why, but I couldn't move. My throat burned, and my voice was gone. I just sat there, frozen, with a smile that wasn't real. Mr. Dalton cleared his throat again, trying to soften the moment. "Your parents spoke highly of you, Zariah. They wanted you to find your own way." Find my own way. I almost laughed. That sounded like something my mother would say after grounding me for missing curfew. I nodded stiffly, thanked the lawyer, and walked out before the tears came. Outside, the air was colder than I expected. The sky was gray, the kind that promises rain, but never delivers. I got in my old Honda Civic, shut the door, and just sat there. My hands were shaking. I couldn't even start the car. I stared at the dashboard for a long time, the world spinning in slow motion. All I could think was, why? Why would my parents do this? I wasn't perfect, but I was there. I called. I visited. I helped them with their bills. Aaron barely showed up, except when he needed money. He lived 2 hours away, too busy with his fancy job in real estate. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel. Part of me wanted to drive to their house. No, his house now, and scream. But what would that fix? They were gone. The will was signed, sealed, and final. All I had left was confusion and a kind of grief I couldn't even name. By the time I got home, it was nearly dark. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at a half-empty mug from this morning. It still had lipstick on the rim. I hadn't realized how lonely my place felt until that moment. Every corner reminded me of my parents. The framed family photo near the hallway, Mom's old ceramic vase by the window, the sweater Dad gave me for Christmas last year, still hanging on a chair. They were everywhere, and yet they'd left me with nothing. My phone buzzed. It was Aunt Ruth. I picked up, hoping for comfort, maybe answers. Her voice was soft but uneasy. "Zariah, honey, I just heard. I'm so sorry. I know this is hard. Did they ever say why?" I asked quietly. "Did they ever mention this decision?" A pause. Then a sigh. "They said something about you being independent, about Aaron needing more guidance." Guidance? Aaron, the man who couldn't manage a checking account without overdrafting? I bit my lip to stop the anger. Aunt Ruth continued, her voice faltering. "I think your father thought this would keep the family together, somehow. You know how he was practical, not always emotional. Practical." I said, laughing bitterly. "They just tore the family apart from the grave. Aunt Ruth." She didn't argue. She just said softly, "Maybe one day you'll understand." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the lawyer's office again. The envelope, the look on Aaron's face, the way my mother's handwriting appeared on the final page of the will. I kept asking myself what I did wrong. Was it because I never married? Because I moved away for a while? Because I wasn't the perfect daughter they pictured? By 3 a.m., I gave up trying to rest. I made coffee and sat on the porch watching the streetlights flicker. The town was quiet, only the sound of distant traffic. I thought about Mom's voice, soft, steady, always telling me everything happens for a reason. Maybe she believed that when she signed that paper, but I didn't. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about being erased. They'd left Aaron everything tangible, property, savings, investments. But what they took from me was invisible, my sense of belonging. The next morning, I drove to the cemetery. The grass was still damp from the morning dew, and a few fallen leaves stuck to my shoes. I stood in front of their graves, my breath visible in the cold air. "I don't get it," I whispered. "You always said you loved us equally. What changed?" A gust of wind blew, rustling the nearby trees. It didn't answer me, but it made me feel small. For a long time, I just stood there. No tears, no anger, just a quiet emptiness. As I turned to leave, I noticed something strange. At the corner of the cemetery, near the older graves, was Mr. Dalton's car, the lawyer's car. He was standing beside another man, someone I didn't recognize. They were talking quietly, and when they saw me, they stopped. Mr. Dalton gave me a polite nod, but there was something in his expression I couldn't read. It stuck with me all the way home. What was he doing there? Who was that man? It was probably nothing, but my gut said otherwise. Later that evening, I went through the old box of my parents' letters and documents I'd kept in the closet. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Maybe proof that they cared, maybe a clue that explained why I was cut out. Most of it was routine stuff. Old tax papers, Dad's insurance letters, a few birthday cards. But near the bottom, tucked inside a thin envelope, I found something different. A short note written in Mom's handwriting. "Zariah, you are stronger than you think. Some things have to be learned the hard way. I hope you'll forgive us one day." My hands trembled as I read it again and again. It wasn't enough to make sense of everything, but it was something. A piece of her voice, even if it hurt to hear it. I folded the letter and placed it back. My eyes burned, but I didn't cry this time. Instead, I felt something else building inside me, a quiet, heavy determination. If they wanted me to find my own way, then that's exactly what I'd do. That night, I cleaned the house like my life depended on it. I threw out junk, packed boxes, scrubbed the kitchen, and even fixed the squeaky cabinet door Dad had meant to replace. It was almost midnight by the time I sat down, exhausted but calmer. I stared out the window at the street light flickering outside. Somewhere out there, Aaron was probably celebrating, thinking he'd won. Maybe he had, for now. But something told me this wasn't the end of our story. I whispered to the empty room, "You got everything, Aaron, but I'm not done yet." And for the first time since that lawyer's office, I meant it. Something had shifted inside me. Not anger, not bitterness, but purpose. The day everything fell apart was also the day I decided to start over. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what my parents wanted all along. Morning came with hard light cutting through the blinds, sharp enough to remind me I was still here. My stomach growled before my thoughts could. The rent was due, the fridge was almost empty, and the silence inside my apartment was too heavy to sit in any longer. I pulled on the same jeans from yesterday, tied my hair back, and glanced at the list I'd scribbled before falling asleep. 1. Find work. 2. Keep the lights on. 3. Don't fall apart where anyone can see. The words looked almost childish in the thin morning light, but they were all I had. Outside, the cold air hit me, with a smell of wet pavement and coffee drifting from the corner diner. My town was already moving, people clutching cups, heads down, pretending they had somewhere better to be. I envied that steady rhythm. I wanted some of it for myself. The Main Street diner had posted a handwritten sign the night before, "Help wanted, afternoons." It wasn't glamorous, but it was something. When I pushed the door open, the bell above it chimed softly. Inside, the air smelled of syrup, bacon grease, and something like comfort. Vinyl booths lined the windows. The counter stools looked older than me. Behind the counter stood a broad man with kind eyes and a tired smile. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I saw the sign," I said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear. "I can start right away." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Afternoons 3 to 8. You ever wait tables?" "A little. I can learn fast." He smiled, slow and approving. "Name's Don. Welcome aboard, Zariah. Grab an apron from the hook." That was it. No interview, no paperwork jungle, just trust wrapped in a short sentence. It felt like breathing again after holding it too long. The first shift nearly broke me. The tray felt heavier than it should, and the smell of coffee clung to my clothes long after I got home. I dropped 2 forks, overfilled 1 cup, and burned my hand on the toaster. But when Don clapped my shoulder at the end and said, "Not bad for a rookie," I almost cried. By the second day, I learned the rhythm, the clatter of dishes, the hum of conversation, the hiss of the grill. I memorized the regulars. Mrs. Parker, who always ordered oatmeal and left a neat $1 tip. Ray, who drank his coffee black and read the paper cover to cover. Jenna, my co-worker, who laughed too loud but meant well every time. Jenna took me under her wing. "Don't rush," she said, sliding a tray onto my hands. "Balance it on your fingertips, not your palms. The trick's all in the wrist." I tried, failed, tried again. By the end of the shift, I could almost do it without trembling. Still, word spread faster than the smell of pancakes. Everyone in town had seen the article about my parents' estate, how everything went to my brother. I felt their eyes skim over me like headlines. At one table, 2 women whispered. One leaned closer, voice too low to be polite. "That's her, right? The daughter who didn't get a dime." I pretended not to hear, pretended harder when the other one said, "I couldn't show my face if that were me." I smiled while pouring coffee because that's what you do. You smile through humiliation, 1 refill at a time. When the lunch rush thinned, Mrs. Parker called me over. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded a napkin. Inside, in blue ink, she'd written, "If you ever need help, come knock. I keep extra sugar." It was simple and strange and perfect. That napkin stayed folded in my apron pocket for weeks. 2 weeks later, my first paycheck arrived, small, crisp, and proof that effort could still mean something. I counted the bills 3 times before walking to the power company. The woman behind the counter gave me a tired smile when I asked about a payment plan. "We can work something out," she said. That night, I turned on every light in the apartment for a full hour just because I could. The next morning, the landlord's note was taped to my door. Rent due Friday. No extensions. I stared at it, heart sinking. I didn't have enough, not even close. So, I added a new line to my list. 4. Find something extra. The diner became my classroom for survival. I learned how to calm angry customers with a steady tone, how to dodge gossip without letting it stick, how to stretch a single meal into 2. One Friday night, a man came in who used to know me from school, Jake, all confident grin and clean jacket. He looked shocked to see me behind the counter. "See," he said, as if my name had turned foreign in his mouth. "Hey, Jake." He asked how I'd been, voice careful, polite. I gave him the only answer that didn't hurt. "Working." When he left, I watched him whisper something to a friend. They both glanced at me. I turned away, busying myself with the sugar shakers until the sting faded. That weekend, Jenna invited me to her cousin's garage sale. "They're selling an old coffee maker for cheap," she said. "Still works." I didn't need it, but I went anyway, for company more than anything. We spent the morning laughing at odd trinkets, the kind of easy laughter I hadn't known in months. I bought a chipped mug for 50 cents that said, "Make it happen." Back home, I washed it carefully and set it beside the folded napkin from Mrs. Parker. Little trophies of trying. By mid-month, exhaustion felt like a second skin. My fingers were sore from carrying plates, my shoes thin from standing too long. But every time I thought about quitting, I remembered that first morning, how hopeless it had felt, and I kept going. The diner's regulars began treating me like part of the scenery, and that was oddly comforting. I knew their orders before they opened their mouths. Ray stopped grumbling about his burnt toast. Mrs. Parker started asking about my day before I asked about hers. One night, as I locked the door after closing, Don handed me a paper bag. "Dinner," he said. Inside was a leftover burger and a slice of pie. "Don't argue. You earned it." I didn't, but I thanked him anyway. The next Tuesday, I saw a flyer pinned to the bulletin board near the bus stop. Free workshop, starting a small business, library community room. Something about it made my chest tighten. I tore the flyer down and folded it into my pocket. That night, I circled the date in my notebook. When the class finally came, I almost didn't go, too tired, too self-conscious. But I made myself. The library's community room smelled of paper and hope. About 10 of us sat in folding chairs, listening to a woman explain basic budgeting and marketing. She asked us to write one goal. I wrote, steady income, own something one day. Next to me sat a woman named Clara who made scented candles at home. We swapped ideas, laughed about how little we knew, and exchanged numbers. For the first time in a long while, I felt the small spark of possibility instead of loss. The following week brought rain, heavy, persistent, the kind that turns streets into mirrors. I trudged to work with damp shoes and an umbrella that wouldn't stay open. By noon, the diner was packed. A man at table 5 accused me of charging him twice for his sandwich. His voice cut through the chatter. "You think I can't read a receipt?" My hands shook. Jenna caught I mouthed breathe. I rechecked the bill, realized he'd added a tip himself and forgotten. When I showed him, his face softened. "Guess I'm the fool today," he said, sliding the corrected slip back. I smiled. "Happens to all of us." Later, he left a $20 tip and a note. You handled that with grace. Back at the apartment, I counted my money again. Still short for rent. Still trying. But I refused to call my brother. Pride isn't cheap, but it's all I had left. That night, Mrs. Parker knocked on my door with a small jar of sugar and half a loaf of banana bread. You work too much, she said. Eat something sweet once in a while. The kindness undid me more than cruelty ever had. By the end of the month, I'd learned small but real things. How to stretch groceries, how to patch a shoe sole with glue, how to look people in the eye again. One night after closing, Jenna told a story about a burnt pie and how her dog ate half of it before she noticed. I laughed, an unguarded, deep laugh that startled me with how good it felt. Walking home in the drizzle, I realized the laughter didn't erase the pain, but made space beside it. At my apartment, I opened the notebook where I tracked bills and wrote. Made it through another week. Still standing. Starting from nothing doesn't mean staying there. I looked around the small, quiet room. It was still modest, still imperfect, but it was mine, earned inch by inch. For the first time since everything fell apart, I didn't feel like I was just surviving. I felt like I was beginning. The morning after that phone call from the landlord, I woke up with a strange mix of exhaustion and determination. I'd been living in a small rented room above a hardware store for almost 6 months now. The place was nothing special. Peeling wallpaper, a noisy heater, and a window that rattled every time the wind blew. But it was mine. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. I made a cup of cheap instant coffee, sat by the window, and looked across the street. A sleek silver car pulled into the cafe parking lot below, a car I recognized instantly. My brother, Ethan. Even from 3 floors up, I could spot his confident stride, the expensive coat, the perfectly styled hair. I hadn't seen him since the will reading. Seeing him there, casually walking like nothing had happened, made my stomach twist. I watched him shake hands with a man in a suit before settling into a corner booth. A folder lay on the table, thick, official-looking. I didn't know why, but I felt an urge to go down there. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was anger. Or maybe, deep down, I just wanted answers I still didn't have. I grabbed my coat, stuffed my notebook into my bag, and went down the creaky staircase. The cold air hit my face as I stepped outside. My boots crunched against the icy sidewalk. I pushed open the cafe door. The bell chimed, soft and familiar. Ethan looked up mid-conversation. For a split second, surprise flickered across his face. Then it vanished, replaced by that same composed smile I'd seen 1,000 times before. "Well, this is unexpected," he said smoothly, motioning to the empty chair across from him. "Zariah, long time no see." I didn't sit. "You're not exactly easy to find." He chuckled, stirring his coffee. "I've been busy. Running the family business tends to do that." The words hit harder than I expected. The family business, the one Dad built from the ground up, the one I grew up helping with after school. Now it was his. Only his. "Looks like things are working out for you," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "They are," he said, flashing that confident grin. "Dad would have wanted it this way. You were never really into business anyway." I stared at him, searching for any trace of guilt. There was none. Just calm, collected arrogance. "Is that what you tell yourself to sleep at night?" I asked quietly. His smile faded just slightly. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Zariah. You got the car, didn't you?" I almost laughed. A 15-year-old car and a box of family photos? That's what you call fair. He sighed, clearly annoyed. "You always did have a flair for dramatics. Look, I don't want a scene. You and I both know Mom and Dad had their reasons." Before I could answer, the man beside him, a middle-aged guy with a stiff expression, cleared his throat. "Mr. Walker, We should review the final figures before next week's presentation. Walker. That was my last name, too. Hearing it from a stranger's mouth, directed only at him, felt like a slap. Ethan turned back to his papers. Right. Let's continue this later. Zariah. I didn't move. I looked at the papers in front of him. Charts, numbers, land deeds. Something caught my eye. One of the pages had our family property listed, the house we grew up in. It had been transferred under Ethan's name, of course, but there was a note at the bottom. Future development site. I froze. You're selling it? He looked up, irritation flashing in his eyes. I'm expanding. It's business, not sentiment. That was our home. It was, he corrected coldly. Now it's a liability. You should understand that by now. For a moment, everything around me faded, the chatter of customers, the clinking cups, the music from the speakers. It was just me and him, two people who shared the same parents, but completely different hearts. I turned and walked out before he could say another word. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, hearing his words over and over. It's business, not sentiment. I thought about the weekends we used to mow the lawn together, the porch, swing Mom loved, Dad's laughter echoing from the garage. And now, all of it would be gone, flattened, turned into something new, something cold. The next morning, I called Mrs. Davis, one of Dad's old employees. She'd worked in his office for years before Ethan took over. Zariah, honey, she said softly, I was wondering when you'd call. Did you know he's selling the house? I asked, trying to hide the tremor in my voice. There was a long pause. Then a sigh. I did. He's been talking to developers for months. Said it's time to move forward. Move forward, I repeated bitterly. Doesn't it bother anyone? Honey, people see money and they forget what used to matter. But don't think for a second your father would have wanted this. He loved that house. I swallowed hard. Then why would he? She cut me off gently. Sweetheart, not everything in that will was your daddy's idea. The silence that followed was deafening. What do you mean? I probably shouldn't say more, she whispered. But let's just say Ethan spent a lot of time with the lawyer before your parents' health went downhill. A lot of time. My pulse quickened. You're saying he influenced them? All I'm saying is, be careful. Ethan's not the boy you grew up with anymore. After I hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone. The pieces were starting to form a picture I didn't want to see. Later that week, I went to the old neighborhood. The front yard was overgrown, and the porch steps creaked like they used to. The for sale sign out front looked so wrong, like it didn't belong there. I walked around to the backyard, where the old oak tree still stood. There were initials carved into the bark, Z+E. We'd done that when we were kids. Walker forever. We wrote underneath, thinking we'd always have each other. I touched the carving, my fingers tracing the faded letters. Forever. Huh? I whispered. A noise startled me. A car door closed somewhere behind me. I turned and saw Ethan's car parked at the curb. He walked toward me slowly, hands in his pockets. You shouldn't be here, he said. I could say the same to you. He looked around. I came to check on the property. What about you? Nostalgia trip? Maybe I just wanted to see what you're destroying. He sighed, glancing up at the tree. You always were sentimental. I stepped closer. You're not fooling anyone, Ethan. I know what you did. He froze for a moment. What are you talking about? You changed the will. You took advantage when they were too sick to fight you. He gave a short laugh. You really think that's how it happened? You've always needed someone to blame. I don't need to think, I said, my voice trembling but firm. I know. For a moment, he didn't respond. Then his expression hardened. Be careful, Zariah. Digging into the past won't change what's done. It'll just make things harder for you. That sounds like a threat. He smiled faintly. It's advice. He turned to leave, but before he reached the car, I said, "You'll regret this." He looked back over his shoulder. "You said that 6 months ago. I'm still waiting." Then he got in his car and drove away, the sound of the engine fading into the distance. That night, I sat by the window again, thinking about everything Mrs. Davis had said, everything I'd seen, and the look in Ethan's eyes when I confronted him. It wasn't guilt. It was fear. Just a flicker, but I saw it. I didn't know how yet, but I promised myself I'd find proof. Proof of what he did. Proof of who he'd become. As the city lights flickered below, I realized something. Ethan might have taken everything from me, money, property, even the family name, but he'd also given me something he didn't expect, a reason to fight back. And for the first time in months, I smiled. A small, quiet smile, because in that moment, I knew something he didn't. He thought he'd won. But the game was just beginning. The day I decided to fight back wasn't a loud one. No slammed doors, no grand speeches, just quiet resolve. The kind that settles deep in your bones and whispers, "It's time." After my confrontation with Ethan, I realized something. Revenge didn't have to be loud. It didn't need chaos. It needed patience and knowledge. He built his empire with manipulation and half-truths. I'd rebuild my life with honesty and grit. I didn't have money or family connections, but I had time. And I decided to use every second of it wisely. It started small. I took on double shifts at the diner where I'd been waitressing. I was still renting that small room above the hardware store, but I began saving whatever I could. A few dollars here, a few there. Some nights, my feet ached so badly, I had to soak them in warm water before bed. But as painful as it was, I felt something new stirring inside me. Progress. On my days off, I attended community college classes in accounting. Numbers had always scared me, but I knew if I wanted to understand Ethan's world, I had to start there. My classmates were mostly younger, kids just out of high school, but I didn't mind. I sat in the back, took notes like my life depended on it, and stayed late after class asking questions. One day, my professor, Mr. Dalton, pulled me aside. "Zariah, you've got a real knack for this," he said, smiling. "Ever think of doing this professionally?" I laughed softly. "I'm a waitress, professor, not exactly CFO material." He shook his head. "Don't sell yourself short. You've got something most don't. Focus. That's rare." That night, I thought about his words as I balanced my checkbook. Maybe he was right. Maybe I did have something left in me worth fighting for. 2 years passed in what felt like a long, steady climb. I completed my associate degree, then started freelancing part-time for small businesses in town. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. I learned about taxes, contracts, and, most importantly, how to read people through numbers. You can tell a lot about someone by how they spend their money and how they hide it. The diner job eventually became unnecessary. I started working as a bookkeeper for a small real estate office owned by a woman named Gloria. She was tough, straightforward, and didn't tolerate nonsense, but she respected hard work. "You've got good instincts," she told me one afternoon while reviewing ledgers. "Ever thought about managing properties yourself one day?" I smiled. "That sounds like a dream." "Well," she said, looking over her glasses, "dreams don't happen overnight, but I see it in you. Just keep moving." Her faith in me meant more than she knew. For the first time in years, someone saw me as more than Ethan's forgotten sister. Outside of work, I kept a close, quiet eye on my brother. His name started popping up in local business journals. Ethan Walker, CEO of Walker Development Group. His company was expanding, acquiring land, and building new properties across the state. Every time I saw his face in print, a familiar ache tugged at me. But it wasn't bitterness anymore. It was clarity. He was building higher and higher, and I knew eventually one wrong move would make him fall. I didn't have to push him. I just had to be ready when it happened. One evening, while closing the office, Gloria handed me a stack of folders. These are our potential new clients. Mind reviewing the numbers before tomorrow? I nodded and tucked them into my bag. Later that night, sitting by my window with a cup of tea, I started flipping through the papers. Halfway through the pile, I froze. There it was, Walker Development Group. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd misread it. But no, the company was looking to partner with Gloria's firm on a new residential project just outside town. Ethan's signature was right there at the bottom of the proposal. My pulse quickened. After all these years, our worlds were crossing again, not by my design, but by fate. The next morning, Gloria came into the office, humming softly. "Did you get a chance to review those files?" she asked. I hesitated. "Yeah, there's one I think we should look closely at. Walker Development." She looked up. "You know them?" "You could say that," I said, keeping my tone even. "They've had a few issues with community pushback in other towns. Might be worth checking their records before we move forward." Gloria raised an eyebrow. "Good catch. Let's do that." Over the next week, I dug into public documents, zoning requests, tax filings, property transfers. I wasn't sure what I was looking for exactly, but the more I read, the more inconsistencies I noticed. It was subtle. Minor discrepancies between reported costs and actual expenditures. But I'd seen this before. Someone was moving money around. Not enough to raise legal alarms yet, but enough to make a careful observer suspicious. That weekend, I drove out to one of the new development sites Ethan's company was building, a cluster of modern townhomes on what used to be a wooded lot. The air smelled of fresh concrete and sawdust. A young man in a hard hat walked by, clipboard in hand. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "I'm with one of the local property offices." I lied smoothly, just checking on progress for potential clients. He nodded, distracted. "Well, we're behind schedule again. The investors aren't happy." "Behind? Why's that?" He shrugged. "Funding delays. Some checks didn't clear. Word is corporates juggling too many projects at once." I thanked him and walked back to my car, heart pounding. Ethan's empire was cracking. Small cracks, but cracks nonetheless. Months turned into a quiet rhythm of work and observation. I didn't share what I'd found with anyone, not yet. I wanted to be sure. In the meantime, I built my own foundation. With Gloria's mentorship, I started a small side venture managing rental properties for independent owners. It wasn't much at first, 2 apartments, then 5, then 12. By the 3rd year, I had a steady income stream and a small office of my own. I even hired an assistant, a bright young woman named Jamie, who reminded me of myself years ago. "You really built all this from scratch?" she asked one day while organizing files. "Bit by bit," I said, smiling. "Quietly but surely." She grinned. "That's kind of inspiring. You know," I laughed softly. "It's just survival. But thank you." Ethan and I didn't speak during those years. Occasionally, I'd pass one of his billboards or see his face in the paper, but I didn't reach out. He was still the golden boy, the visionary businessman, but I could see the exhaustion behind his public smile. The weight of success was starting to show. And quietly, I was growing stronger while he was spreading himself thin. One spring morning, I got a call from Gloria. "Zariah, you have a minute?" "Of course." "I just got word that Walker Development is under audit. Something about discrepancies in their expense reports." I stood frozen, phone pressed to my ear. "Are they serious?" "Dead serious. Word is they might have overstated their assets to secure new loans." I felt my chest tighten, not from joy, but something more complex. I didn't celebrate. I just listened, calm and steady. "Thank you for telling me," I said quietly. "Funny thing," Gloria added, "their CFO resigned last month. Guess he didn't want to stick around for the fallout." I hung up and sat in silence for a long time. The irony wasn't lost on me. Years ago, Ethan had taken everything from me in that lawyer's office. Now, it was his turn to lose control, piece by piece. But I didn't gloat. I just felt peaceful, because by then, my life wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rebuilding what I'd lost: dignity, purpose, and self-worth. That evening, I drove past my old neighborhood. The house where we grew up was still standing, somehow unsold after all these years. The "for sale" sign was weathered and leaning, the paint faded. I parked across the street and sat there for a while, watching the porch sway gently in the breeze. The tree with our initials still stood tall, though the carvings had almost disappeared with time. For the first time, I didn't feel pain looking at it. I felt peace, because that place wasn't my prison anymore. It was just part of a story I'd outgrown. That night, as I closed my office, Jamie poked her head in. "Hey boss, want me to lock up?" I smiled. "Go ahead. You've earned the early night." She grinned and waved as she left. I stood there for a moment, looking at the sign above my desk, Walker Property Solutions. Yes, I'd kept the name, not out of nostalgia, but as a quiet reminder that sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. It's growth. Growth that no one can take away. And for the first time in years, I realized something Ethan never did. You don't need to win loud to win big. Sometimes you just need to grow quietly and let your success speak louder than any revenge ever could. I'll never forget the morning it happened. The sky was that washed-out blue that only comes after a long storm, the kind that makes you feel like something new might finally begin. I woke up earlier than usual, heart steady for once, coffee brewing in my tiny kitchen, sunlight painting the countertops gold. Life had become simple, predictable, and almost peaceful. I thought I'd finally built something solid, until the letter arrived. It was tucked between bills and a flyer for a local market, but its heavy cream envelope and bold legal stamp immediately made my chest tighten. My hands trembled before I even opened it. Inside, a single sentence stared back at me. "You are requested to appear for the reading of the late Robert Emerson's estate." My breath caught. My brother, Mason. I hadn't heard his name spoken aloud in over 6 years. The words on that page felt like a ghost knocking at the door of the life I'd built from ashes. For a moment, I just stood there in my kitchen, frozen, the smell of coffee turning bitter as it burned on the warmer. I didn't even realize tears had filled my eyes until one slid down onto the paper, blurring his name. When I finally sat down, the chair creaked beneath me. I pressed the letter flat on the table and read it again and again, hoping I'd misread it. Mason had been gone barely a month. His death had been quick, sudden. A car accident. I'd seen it mentioned briefly on a local news site, but hadn't known what to feel then. Now I knew. Shock, sadness, confusion, and beneath it all, something darker, an ache I didn't want to name. Because even after all these years, part of me still loved my brother, and another part still hated him. The day of the estate meeting, I almost didn't go. I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't want anything from him. But deep down, I needed closure, needed to know if he'd left behind anything that proved I hadn't been invisible in his world. The law office was the same one where, years ago, I discovered our parents had left me nothing. Walking through those glass doors again felt like reopening a scar. The receptionist greeted me softly, almost like she could sense the history I carried. Inside, the lawyer, Mr. Graham, looked older but just as sharp as ever. He adjusted his glasses, gestured toward the seat across from him, and slid a thick folder in front of him. "Zariah," he said, voice gentle, "I wasn't sure you'd come." "Neither was I replied quietly. He nodded, then opened the folder. "Your brother's estate was complicated. He left specific instructions for this meeting." I swallowed. "Instructions?" "Yes." He folded his hands. "He left you something." My pulse jumped. For a moment, the room went silent except for the hum of the ceiling fan. "He left me something?" Mr. Graham gave a faint smile. "Not what you might expect. But yes." He slid a small black box across the table. Inside, there wasn't jewelry or a key or a deed. Just a worn flash drive and a folded letter. The letter was addressed in Mason's handwriting, familiar, jagged, hurried. I hadn't seen it since before the inheritance, before everything had fallen apart. I stared at it for a long time before I dared to touch it. "Is that all?" I asked. "That's all," the lawyer confirmed, "but he asked that you read it alone." My throat tightened. I nodded, took the box, and left. Back home, I sat in the quiet of my living room, the envelope trembling in my hands. I wanted to hate whatever was inside it, but I couldn't ignore the shaking in my chest, the same feeling I used to have when we were kids, and Mason would sneak into my room with a flashlight to tell stories after curfew. I unfolded the letter slowly. "Zariah, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to tell you face to face what I should have said a long time ago. I failed you. I took what wasn't mine, not just money, but peace, and maybe even your faith and family. The truth is, I didn't win. The inheritance I took burned faster than I could spend it. The businesses failed, the investments crumbled, and I chased more out of guilt than greed. Every dollar felt like poison. And by the end, I realized I didn't inherit wealth. I inherited their mistakes. Though you built something real. I watched from a distance. And yes, I was proud. You worked for every breath, every inch. You became everything I wasn't brave enough to be. That's why this flash drive matters. It holds something I think belongs to you. Not money, but the proof of what our parents actually left behind. The real inheritance was never cash. It was truth. Mason, I didn't breathe for nearly a minute. My eyes darted between the flash drive and the last line of his letter. The real inheritance was truth. It sounded cryptic, but something inside me shifted. I plugged the drive into my old laptop, and a folder appeared, dated 10 years back. Inside were scans of old documents, recordings, even letters between our parents and the lawyer. And as I read, the truth unfolded like a wound reopening. My parents hadn't intentionally cut me out. Mason had. Years ago, he'd convinced them that I didn't need their help, that I wanted to make it on my own. He'd altered documents, deleted letters meant for me, and positioned himself as the responsible child who'd take care of me later. But he never did. I sat frozen, tears spilling freely now, my hands clenched into fists. "Mason, you liar," I whispered. "You took everything." But then I thought of the letter, the way he'd written it, the remorse in every word. He'd known. He'd carried it with him. And maybe in the end, this was his way of setting things right. Over the next few days, I couldn't think straight. I printed every document, laid them across my table, cross-referencing signatures and dates. It was undeniable. Mason had betrayed me, but he'd also spent years trying to fix what he broke, quietly helping people, donating, trying to rebuild what he'd ruined. One folder caught my eye. It contained property deeds, small community centers, youth shelters, libraries. They were all under his name, but next to each was a note, to be transferred to Zariah Emerson Foundation. My name, my foundation, one that didn't exist yet. I sat there in stunned silence, realization flooding me. Mason hadn't just left me guilt. He'd left me purpose. He knew I'd do something better with it. That night, I went for a long walk through the quiet streets of the town I'd rebuilt my life in. The air smelled like rain and old pine. I passed small houses, people laughing on porches, children chasing each other in the fading light. And for the first time, I understood what he meant. The real inheritance wasn't what our parents left. It was what I'd learned to create. Resilience, compassion, the will to rise without bitterness. Still, closure didn't come easily. I visited his grave a week later. The earth was still fresh, the flowers beginning to wilt. I stood there for a long time, the letter folded in my pocket. "I should hate you," I said softly. "But I don't. I think you finally did the right thing." A breeze swept through the cemetery, scattering petals across the grass. I smiled faintly, tears slipping free. Months passed, and I started the foundation Mason had written about. The first project funded a community kitchen for single mothers and struggling students, the same kind of people I once stood beside at the edge of survival. As the work grew, so did I. My name no longer carried bitterness, only quiet strength. Mason's name, once heavy with betrayal, now stood beside mine on every plaque, every certificate. It didn't erase the past, but it made peace with it. One evening, I sat in my office, reviewing the foundation's latest reports. Donations had grown beyond anything I imagined. As I closed my laptop, I noticed something tucked beneath a folder. A small photo of me and Mason as kids, our faces messy with birthday cake. For the first time in years, I laughed through my tears. That was it. That was the inheritance, the ability to forgive, to rebuild, to live without letting pain define you. I whispered into the quiet room. "You were right, Mason. The real inheritance was truth." Outside, thunder rumbled softly, but it didn't sound threatening anymore. It sounded like something ending, and something else just beginning. Looking back now, I realize life never gave me the inheritance I once thought I wanted, the money, the comfort, the recognition. Instead, it gave me something far more enduring, strength born from struggle, forgiveness carved out of pain, and peace that no amount of wealth could ever buy. For years, I believed my worth had been written out of a will, erased by choices made behind closed doors. But what I didn't understand was that real inheritance isn't written on paper. It's built through resilience, compassion, and the courage to start again when everything falls apart. When I visit the foundation today, I see people rebuilding their lives, the single mothers finding work, the young students gaining confidence, the families sitting down to warm meals they couldn't afford before. In their faces, I see pieces of my own story, and, strangely, pieces of Mason too. He may have taken everything once, but in the end, he gave me the chance to build something far greater than either of us imagined. Sometimes, when the office grows quiet and the city hums outside, I think about how one letter, one truth, changed everything. It didn't erase the past, but it helped me finally make peace with it. The pain, the betrayal, the loneliness, they weren't the end of my story. They were the beginning of who I was meant to become. If my parents were alive today, I think they'd be proud, not of what I own, but of what I've built from nothing. And maybe, just maybe, Mason finally found his peace too, because in the end, the real inheritance wasn't his money or his guilt. It was the love that managed to survive, quietly beneath it all.